Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to begin by thanking my friend and colleague, Senator Whitehouse, on this topic of plastics and ocean cleanup. He and I have been tag teaming for a number of years on the Save Our Seas Act 1.0, the Save Our Seas Act 2.0, which the Congressional Research Service called the most comprehensive ocean cleanup, ocean debris legislation ever passed in the history of the Congress. That was very bipartisan. Trump administration, now Biden administration, we're implementing that. So there's a lot of bipartisan work going on in this area of plastics and cleanup, particularly for our oceans, which I think literally everybody agrees with. So I'm looking forward to continuing to work with him, this committee, on the next phase of that, which I think is very important. The title of this hearing, though, I want to dig into that, the topic of environmental justice a little bit more from our witnesses, because in my state, the great state of Alaska, there's a real double standard on environmental justice. You know, the Biden administration talks about how their report on environmental justice listed a number of projects that, quote, will not benefit a community, including fossil fuel production, pipeline development, even possibly roads. This is ridiculously naive, in my view. And what I worry about sometimes is when we talk about environmental justice, the Native people, the indigenous people of my state, always get left out of the Biden administration's views. So maybe for the witnesses, shouldn't environmental justice include indigenous people in Alaska? Does everybody agree with that? Everybody's nodding. I'm assuming that's not a trick question. It's just a pretty basic question. I think the answer is yes, Mr. Chairman. And yet, whether it's the King Cove Road, that's a road that would connect the community, King Cove, it's a Native community in Alaska, where they've been trying to build a 12-mile single-lane dirt road to an airport that would save lives. This administration is now opposing it. Secretary Holland, every radical lower 48 environmental group opposes that. That's not environmental justice. We had a bill of mine, the Alaskan Native Vietnam veterans, getting land, native allotments to Alaskan natives who served in Vietnam. Secretary Holland won't implement that at all because radical lower 48 environmental groups don't want Native Americans who served in Vietnam, when most people are avoiding service, to get land. Is that environmental justice? Hell no. That's not environmental justice. The Ambler Road, which this administration has now reversed, that was supported by a number of indigenous communities in Alaska, create jobs. So my point, Mr. Chairman, is a lot of talk about environmental justice, but when it comes to Alaska Native people, indigenous people in my state, almost 20% of the population, this administration targets them so often, and their claims of environmental justice are just, I don't know, they're really harming the people of my state, particularly the Native people, the indigenous people. And so I don't want an exception for environmental justice. Shouldn't be an exception. You guys agree? I think everybody, this is not a controversial statement. Indigenous people in Alaska should be getting the same benefits that everybody else does under this rubric of environmental justice, but they don't. So I'm just going to let that stand here, Mr. Chairman. It's a big issue for me. It's hypocritical by the White House, by the way. But let me just ask a general question, maybe Mr. Sunday, Ms. Jackson. And again, I've worked hard on the issue of plastics and pollution and making sure we don't pollute our oceans. But one thing I do worry about is that if we crack down on plastics here, the production of that is just going to drive it overseas to China, places that don't have strong environmental standards like we do. Is that a concern, and should we be making sure that any action or legislation we take doesn't have the perverse impact of driving operations and jobs to China, where their environmental standards on the production of plastics aren't nearly as high as ours? You have a view on that, Mr. Sunday?
Yes, Senator, thanks for the question. It's the right perspective. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the U.S. greenhouse gas emission reductions are greater than the next four countries combined.
Yeah.
China's is greater than all the OECD nations. So I'd
I mean,
rather we use our...
China's going up the other way.
Correct.
And ours are going down. Right,
Good.
because of the revolution in the production of natural gas, correct?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Jackson, do you have a view on that in terms of, we don't want plastic production going to the dirtiest producer, which is China, and then taking our jobs away. You have a view on that?
Yes, you know, it's our economy that's always being attacked, even though we're the least polluters.
Yeah.
China is the greatest polluter.
Right.
But yet they're being able to get the benefit of when we attack our economy, when we kill our jobs, we push them over to the biggest polluter. If you really believe that plastics are a danger to the planet, it should be a danger no matter where it's produced.
Correct.
But somehow only Americans are being penalized.
So we don't want to kill jobs and then send production to China that will pollute the environment globally even worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to the narrative that we don't really believe this. It's this kind of where we want to just signal that we're good people. But if you care about people, you care about all people. And if you believe that plastics are harming individuals, why harm other people overseas? How come they're expendable? And it shouldn't be that way. But again, this country is subject to the most rigorous regulations. And those companies are actually meeting those standards. And if they're not, why is it Michael Regan in here talking about why we're not making sure that our companies are not adhering to those standards? Because nobody really believes that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.